The communication is a basic milestone in increasing the role of the private sector for development efforts of the European Union. There are 2 or 3 basic facts that must be well known. Number one, ODA has not been increasing as much as we thought 10 years ago, and it's not going to happen in the near future. Number two, ODA alone has not produced the lasting effects of sustainable development and growth that we would hope for. Number three, who produces normally employment for the poor people everywhere in the world is not government, it is the private entrepreneurs. So putting together all these issues, then we see that there is really a need for a concept around what role shall the private sector play, not only in putting money, because we don't want to give money to the private sector, we want the private sector investing into development activities. But more importantly, what is the strategic position of economic and actors in this process? The communication has been a great success of participation, over 200 written contributions, many hundred meetings all over the world, and we have then packed this in a very concise document with also some concrete actions and ways to go forward. So I would say one, dialogue with the governments to create an enabling environment for investments and conducive private sector practices. Two, private sector becoming more responsible, more sustainable towards decent jobs, for example, not only jobs, but decent jobs. And three, of course, amplifying the range of activities and partnership. I think the private sector in the European Union can offer a valid partnership to the private sector in developing countries, and that must be associated to our government-to-government relations as well to the civic society. We have to adapt also our thinking inside the Commission, the bureaucracy, not only the Commission bureaucracy, but also Member States development agencies. We have to now accelerate this process of partnership and blending of ideas and actors. We do see that with the blending activities, that is mixing grants from taxpayers with loans and equity investments from the private sector, we have already done a very big leap forward. We need to do more now. We need to see also small and medium enterprises really entangling in a longer-term lasting partnership, because access to market, technology transfer, these are very important arguments, and this is exactly the opposite of other emerging nations' approach to development, which is in a way sort of going to exploit natural resources, bringing to the other places. For us, it's much more going into those new emerging markets with our private sector and then linking with our decent job agenda, with our sustainability, with our vulnerability targets. And that's why the association, you say how to do this, it's not easy, but the association of the civic society with the private sector, the profit with the non-profit, the classical NGO approach enriched by the sustainability of investments which are also bearing on corporate social responsibility could represent an answer to your question. The private sector in Europe is struggling. I think you open the newspapers and you see growth in Europe is not rebuilding. Now, we live in a global village. We live in a globalization era. I think it's time for the European Union leaders also to look at growth outside the European Union. So the economic sustainability of the European Union is going together with the economic growth sustainability of the emerging and developing countries. So it is a win-win situation. Our private sector is moving there to invest, but also to liaise, to discover new markets. The technology transfer can represent what can be at stake, and bigger investments in countries where the European Union can also hedge somehow the political risk can indeed open very good business opportunities. The Council has already had the first set of conclusions last week on Monday, and they will go into now a debate. The Council will look at the operational plan that the Commission has put forward. There will be a launch in an informal council in July in Italy, in Florence, of a dialogue between the private sector and the European Union, structured dialogue as we call it, which is also building on the very good successful structural dialogue that we are having with the civil society. And then in this period between July and November there will be consultations with the private sector, also at the light of the discussion in New York on the SDGs and the upcoming communication of the European Union on the new development goals, to arrive to conclusions which must be very practical, very operational of the Council, hopefully in December, having also regard to the new Parliament, because we have also to listen, and we want to listen to the ideas of the Parliament on this. Access to finance is a problem, but access to the right kind of finance for small and medium enterprise is the biggest problem. When I say the right kind of finance, I mean that a loan at 28% interest rate is no good for agriculture. An equity investment into agriculture for 6-7 years period is good. Why? Because the risk is higher, because the period of maturing the investment is longer, and that's why we need to provide what we call patient capital. And that's why you need to hedge the risk of a private investor with public money. Again, it's a blending. Private and public money blend into an equity fund which has got high impact with small and medium entrepreneurs, which are able then to pool the economic forces of the country, to create employment, to create value chain. Of course, we have to continue also to assist the poorest of the poor. This is a fundamental ethical obligation. We have to continue with our principled approach to the private sector. As I say, corporate social responsibility, environment, decent jobs, and equitability for everybody. But at the bottom of all this, there is the sustainability of business. So creating that is really typical of the private sector, and that's where we have to enable this. The example in Uganda, which we hope to replicate, is just starting now, and we hope to replicate this in other countries. It's very country specific, but that example can also fetch pension funds investments with us, and therefore we hope to enlarge the availability of good finance sources for small, micro and medium enterprise in Africa and elsewhere.